Okay, great. Let me just kind of run through this quickly, give you an overview of where we are in the process, what our mission is, a little bit about how we see your role, and then we'll quickly get to the heart of the matter, which is getting your input on where we go from here. A few months ago in the Deseret News, there was a story with this headline: why Utah has a once-in-a-generation opportunity unique to any other place in the world. That's quite a statement. But as we've talked to real estate experts and site selectors who have been in the area, they've said to have about 700 acres of blank canvas in the middle of a fast-growing metropolitan area, and especially in the heart of a burgeoning high-tech sector, is unheard of. And so we recognize that we've got a remarkable opportunity, which also puts on us a significant responsibility to take advantage of that opportunity. This is a little view of the site today. The correctional facility in Draper. It's been there since 1950. And for many years, there's been discussion among state leaders about moving the site. One big driver for that was just to better fulfill the correctional mission of the Department of Corrections and have a facility that would better prepare inmates to return to society. The other piece is that it's a remarkable piece of real estate, and as communities grow, they evolve, and this is part of that. The site is all within Draper, but the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority, our organization, has land use authority over this site. We'll be working very closely with surrounding communities to make it happen. So the legislature passed a bill in 2018 that establishes this authority. And we've got a board that we'll talk about. We've got the authorities I mentioned, but also some objectives that were set forth by the legislature directing our activities. They want us to maximize job creation, to work on developing our workforce, ensure that they're highly trained. It's important that we have a high quality of life here, not just on this site, but in surrounding communities. To address transportation and traffic challenges and better use our resources, they want us to have a balance between jobs and housing on the site so people can live and work in the same area. They want us to look at recreational opportunities, natural lands, tying some of the regional trails together. Think going from Bonneville Shoreline Trail through this site to the Jordan River Parkway Trail and other opportunities. It's not surprising that air quality is on the top of mind to many of us. And so they've asked us to look at strategies to improve air quality and minimize resource use, energy, and water. Transportation is going to be vital here. We've got kind of a bottleneck area and there's already a traffic challenge. So they've directed us to explore world-class transit and other transportation solutions on the site. We've got to be a good neighbor. And so we're going to work very closely with surrounding communities to be aligned in vision and make sure that what we do enhances those communities and isn't developed in isolation. And interestingly, and I think particularly important to this group, the statute directs us to explore a nationally recognized research center. And so we'll probably be talking about that a little bit more. We've got an 11-person board appointed by the governor, the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and then some members by virtue of their position. Spencer Cox, the lieutenant governor, and Representative Lowry Snow are the co-chairs of the board. And other board members include Mayor Don Ramsey from South Jordan, Senator Jerry Stevenson, of course, Representative Handy, who's leading our group here. Jim Russell is the director of the Division of Facilities and Construction Management for the state. Val Hale oversees the Governor's Office of Economic Development. Commissioner Wolstenholme, the Commissioner of Higher Education, who's given us really an important voice on the board. State Senator Lincoln Fillmore, Mayor Troy Walker of Draper, and April Cooper, who is the president and CEO of Alpine Companies. And they do real estate work. This board has land use authority over the site. They've got authority to make decisions for the site. And they've been wonderful to work with. The board adopted some guiding principles to help us as we make decisions. The first of those was that we will promote the public interest ahead of any individual interests. This is state land. It's owned by all residents of the state, and we've got a solemn obligation to provide a return financially and socially to all people in the state. So again, driven by the public interest. Secondly, set the standard. We want to have a high bar for development. We want to do something here that is special, that stretches the envelope a little bit, and will maybe change the course of development in our state as a model of sustainable, practical development. Think regionally. We've got responsibility for this approximately 700-acre site. If we focus only on this site, we're going to miss opportunities and probably create problems in the area. So we need to think regionally, work with our regional partners in transportation and land use, and make sure that we're solving regional problems. Next is take the long view. Rather than trying to get the quick buck out of this, we want to be thoughtful and move ahead in a way that will create a place that provides returns to the state for generations to come. Be open and transparent. Again, born of a public project, we think the public needs to be part of what we do here. And so we're going to strive to be open and transparent. And I think maybe that's a place to say, for the record, these meetings and this virtual meeting is being recorded. So it'll be on the record and on our website. Then finally, act with integrity. We're just committed to following the law, following good data, and acting with uncompromising integrity. What we do has got to be beyond reproach. So we're not starting from scratch here. There's been work done over the past few years. A group called the Point of the Mountain Development Commission, also created by the legislature, was charged with looking at potential development in the Point of the Mountain region. So kind of think Sandy to Saratoga Springs. And they conducted a public process with Envision Utah, with some consultants, and involved well over 4,000 people in talking about what they wanted to see here, what they value, what ideas they had. Part of that exercise was developing scenarios for how our site and how the region could grow, and then showing the consequences of those development patterns in terms of things like public revenues, traffic impact, air quality impact, values of land, etc. The public overwhelmingly chose scenarios D and E, which is reflected in a vision that was created for this area. This is kind of a depiction of the broader vision. That area in the middle shows key locations in the region and proposed transportation solutions. We've got a bottleneck there, and if we want to avoid creating the biggest bottleneck in the West and instead create the greatest opportunity in the West, we're going to have to be thoughtful and make some investment in that area. The public said that they wanted to see jobs created, wanted to see development of our workforce. The environment was important, improving air quality, reducing resource use, connecting trails, having parks and open space. Community design wanted vibrant urban centers, places where people could gather, jobs close to where people live, and a variety of housing and community types. Transportation got a lot of attention, having some new north-south connections, connecting the street grid so that there are more ways of getting around, so not everybody's going on the same few arterials. World-class public transit, and looking at that critical east-west connection. And finally, looking specifically at our Draper prison site, how we make that a catalytic center that would spur development in the broader region and specifically have a research university presence. Now, as I read through those might sound familiar. They're virtually identical to what was in the legislation that was created. And that's because it was this public process, again, involving thousands of people, that led to the statute creating the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority. So let's talk about a little bit about where you come in to all of this. And actually, maybe before I jump off this slide, the consultants did an analysis of this vision, compared it with baseline growth patterns. And they found that if we built consistently with this vision, that by 2050, public revenues would go from about 12 billion to 19.7 billion in this area. So significant return on investment. They also found that, again, building under this vision would add $10,000 to the average annual household income of every household on the Wasatch Front. Think about what that means. By 2050, every year, more than $10,000 in each household. And they found that travel time would be reduced significantly relative to the baseline increases in expected travel time. All right, to where you come in. We've got 5 working groups. The stakeholder group is primarily elected officials that are helping us communicate with the public and make sure we're hearing what the neighbors are concerned about. They met this morning and we had a very good discussion. Next is this group, the Education, Research, and Innovation Group. And as the name suggests, we're looking at ways that we can maximize the opportunities to innovate at this site, to make Utah a leader in whatever areas we decide we need to focus on, and a place where the world looks for solutions to problems. Tomorrow we'll meet with the Environment and Air Quality Group. It will help us develop an environmentally sustainable community. Thursday morning, the Infrastructure and Land Use Group will meet. Those are primarily planners and officials in cities, education officials and others that'll help us lay out the site. Then finally, economic development, recruitment, and investment. These are a lot of business leaders that will help us think through how we can provide the greatest economic return to the state, bring in some of the top anchor companies, and identify private investments that can supplement any public investment in the site. So these groups are scheduled to meet for a couple of hours once a month for the next year. We'll let the work dictate whether we need to meet that many times, but we think this is just absolutely critical. The board and the staff of the authority don't know everything, and we don't have any kind of market on the good ideas. Because this is a state project, a community project, we want to reach out to leaders in the community that can help us really optimize this opportunity. So our board is charged legally with making decisions, but they've said that they want to listen very carefully to you. They want your input. There's a reason that we have members of our board serving as co-chairs of these groups. they're going to hear what you say and be able to share that information with our broader board. You'll very much be part of guiding the development of this project. And we're very excited about that and appreciate your willingness. This is kind of a timeline of what's happened since the Prison Location Commission was formed about 6 years ago. The new prison is scheduled to be completed in mid-2022, and the inmates will be moved at that time. We then want to be ready for any demolition work, site prep work, laying the groundwork for implementing the vision that we'll be developing over the next year plus. So I mentioned that in 2018, at the same time the vision of the Development Commission was released, the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority was created. They hired me as executive director about a year ago. We've been laying the foundation for the organization, got our first appropriation in March in the legislative session. That's allowed us to build a team, and we've had engineers go out and do a site survey, looking at archaeological issues, wetlands, environmental, historical, soil survey, etc. And I'm happy to say that they didn't find any material concerns. We've got real estate advisors looking at highest and best use, looking at how we can best operate and govern this site as a state entity, and what the innovation piece might look like. And again, legal counsel, a communications firm, and just last night we identified a planning consultant who's going to help us through the planning process. So here's kind of our timeline as a working group. For the next 2 or 3 months, we'll be working on identifying what we want to include in an RFQ for a planning team. What are the elements that we'd like to see at this site? What do we expect the winning team to be able to accomplish? Then we'll, during the winter, kind of head into a period of establishing more recommendations for a general plan for the site. And we hope that by the first part of the calendar year, we'll have in place a planning team that can start the master planning process. And then through the spring and early summer, we'll be reviewing with that team their drafts of a master plan and kind of making sure that the product they develop is consistent with the goals of the legislature and what we hear from you and the public. So that's sort of the broad overview. And I guess I'll turn it back to our co-chairs, and we can answer any questions you have based on what I said, and then start getting into the conversation.
Thank you, Alan. I would just say, and then see what Dave has to say here, that it'd be really interesting to hear from anyone who would like to, I think, any reactions or questions that you have from that really terrific overview that Alan has just made. This, for myself and Commissioner Wolstenhume, I mean, we have been working on this now for a couple of years, and we know where we're trying to go. But for most of you, I bet this is just totally, absolutely, probably a new view of what this is going to be. We all know the point of the mountain, and we came up with this. We're going to call it the point, and Muriel can expand upon that if she'd like to. But at the point, and I just wonder if any of you have any questions or comments. Don't you think, Dave, that's the way to go? Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's great, Representative. So I'd love to hear the input or thoughts from people on this working group.
I was curious. There's a lot of different committees, and one of the challenges in a situation like this is always bringing it all together in a meaningful way and synergizing the various parts. If I missed that, I apologize, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how it all comes together.
That is a fantastic question, and certainly a challenge that we have. So we'll be bringing recommendations from the various working groups. First to staff, we'll work on trying to find areas of commonality and overlap and present those to the board for further discussion. I think we'll use that input to really refine our vision of what should happen at this site. And we'll utilize our real estate and planning consultants to do that. Let me just say, there is a risk here that when you talk in lofty terms as we have, that we try to be all things to all people, or do something that is so futuristic that it's impractical and can't be built. So we want to make sure that in our conversations, we have our consultants helping us to stay firmly rooted in market reality as we push the envelope. But we'll be working with the board to refine the vision, bring it back to you for your review and comment, and view it as an iterative document that's refined over time.
I appreciate the focus on practicality. I think you're exactly right. Thank you.
Alan, you mentioned that there was a decision made last night on a land use consultant. Is that public knowledge yet?
It's not yet, and I've reached out to the individual and haven't been able to get in touch yet. So I think we're going to hold off announcing that until we talk to those that had applied. But okay. I will say we're really excited. I mean, this is world-class talent who has worked all over the world on major projects, is well-known, well-regarded throughout the country, and I think will be a tremendous asset.
So will there be a university affiliation for this research site? It wasn't clear to me whether this would be affiliated with one of the current university institutions here.
Well, frankly, that's part of our discussion here. That's part of what this group is going to help us think through. There's a lot of interest in having a university or universities presence of some kind here. And I think those are details that we want your input on.
Alan, this is Chris Klump. Do you see us having separate, smaller group working sessions in preparation for these monthly meetings, or what do you anticipate the cadence being, given that this is still a relatively large working group and 16 attendees working virtually can be challenging when we're focusing on generative ideation?
It is, and I think that's a great point. We have considered potentially reaching out to a few of you from time to time, having some individual meetings, trying to facilitate better conversation, because, yeah, believe me, this is a big group, and over technology, it's even harder sometimes to get everybody's input. We don't want to monopolize your time. You're all very busy, but to the extent you're willing and there's a need, we likely will be reaching out for just some conversations between our broader meetings.
Chris, this is Commissioner Wolfgang. One of the things I think is going to be very helpful as we move forward is once we identify the areas that we ought to really be looking at, hopefully 3 or 4 things start to surface, then I think we could break out into some smaller subgroups to really focus in on that. I think that kind of gets the experts in the right area, right? Whether we're talking the education piece or we're talking industry piece, obviously we're going to want to have a lot of crossover there. But I think we can start to kind of break off into some smaller groups and then bring it back in these types of bigger discussions from the experts, and we'll be able to get a lot more accomplished that way. That's kind of what my mindset was anyway going into today.
I think it's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Alan, if you could just touch on some of the challenges you see. I know that there's been a lot of input on what people want to see out of this area, and particularly as you look at, how do we navigate what research and innovation and education look like in this fantastic opportunity? Do you see challenges for this group? Do you think, are there things that you anticipate us specifically working through?
Yeah, thank you. And I think some of that will reveal itself as we have conversations. But I was up at the legislature one afternoon, and in a 5-minute period, I had 3 people come up to me and tell me what the future of this site should be. And the first said, all electric city of the future. And that was the representative from Rocky Mountain Power. The second one said, Disneyland, Utah. We're tired of driving to Southern California. Let's put it here. And the third said, all agriculture. And that was representative from the Farm Bureau. I don't know if any of those will be the ultimate decision, but the point is there are a lot of different ideas about what ought to happen here. I think there's general consensus that came out of that public process toward mixed use, community, live, work, play, with a strong research, innovation, education element. I think part of the challenge we're going to face is identifying what we ought to be focusing on. It's one thing to say this will be an innovation district. I think to be successful, we need to target that. Are there areas that are where we have particular strengths as a state and where we can contribute most nationally? Is it cybersecurity, AI, quantum computing, biotech, high tech, some combination of those? And so I think part of the challenge we're going to face is deciding how we focus these ideas a little bit. We want a university presence, but I don't know that it's practical to have something for every university there. And as we said, we're probably not looking for satellite campuses. We're looking for research programs in cutting edge areas. So how does that fit? Working with the public to help them appreciate what's happening and make sure that we're focusing on benefiting the state. This is a small site, but we're not focusing just on this site. We're trying to do things that will have a broader benefit, whether it's through economic development that increases revenues and allows us to buy infrastructure and provide services and education to the public, whether it's putting Utah more on the map and attracting more attention in certain industries, whether it's setting an example of development that becomes a model so others start doing the similar things throughout the state and creating more sustainable communities. But we want to take that broader focus. That's not easy to do, and we'll want your help in thinking through those issues.
Let me just add something here. I mean, the state, there is a, and it is a minority view, but there is a minority view in the legislature that why are we doing this? Why doesn't the state just sell the ground to the highest bidder? Just get out of this, because we're really not in the development business. That should be clear to all taxpayers. What we're trying to do, though, is provide, I think that the majority view is to provide a master plan that, going back to what we said initially, this is and what Alan well articulated again, this is a once in a generational opportunity. And to just throw this open to the highest bidder, I mean, this is extremely valuable property. You look at where this is, but that just doesn't seem right to most of us. It seems that we ought to go through this effort. We're spending taxpayer dollars to master plan this and to get the best thinking from around the country, frankly, to determine how to do this and what ought to happen with this. So there are questions out there that have yet to be answered by the board, by the legislature, by the governor about this property. But we're trying to get ahead of it and provide that kind of guidance when those discussions, might ramp up. If that makes a lot of sense to some of you, what I'm saying, right, Alan and Dave? So.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that I think is going to be critical as we move forward with this from the educational side of things is for the educational opportunities that do present themselves as we start to have this discussion. In my perspective, and I'll throw it out now, and I'm happy to have anybody debate this or walk through it, but this is from a few board members that I've spoke to as well. The new board members, we've started having this discussion, is any educational opportunities that are there really need to be tied directly with industry. We have enough teaching institutions throughout the state. What we need is to have the institutions that we currently have really being connected with industry to drive the economy and drive innovation. And so from our perspective, just know that that's kind of where we're coming this at from the education component, is how can we better link and connect with industry to drive what industry needs to move forward with. From my perspective, and it's only Dave's perspective, but as we miss that opportunity there at this site, we've done nothing rather than just create another educational opportunity, right? But if the education is really connected with whatever it is the industry that we determine needs to go in there, and then determine who's the best institution to facilitate that, then I think that's where the direction of education should be in this area. It's not to teach another general education class. It's really to be connected to what is it on the innovation side the industry needs us to do, cooperating together to move that forward, much like you'd see in a research triangle in North Carolina or other places that's really driving the economy and driving innovation.
Well, and
jump in on something real quick. We've had RCLCO looking at potential models for us around the country of what innovation districts work. And innovation districts are places where industry and education come together, where you have accelerators, startups, incubators, venture capital, mature businesses, programming that creates communication among different disciplines, spurs new ideas. Some of these work and some of them don't. And so we're trying to see where we have peer projects around the country that have a similar situation as ours and what's made them successful. And most of them have a really strong anchor, whether it's the private sector, whether it's a hospital focus or a university, or often many of those. And so as we think about an innovation district here, we're going to want to think about how we create an ecosystem of entrepreneurism, how we grow companies, how we bring new research and ideas to market, and advance the interests of the state.
What I hear you talking about is not just a one-time sale, but kind of a compounding interest, doing something that will generate a return for many, many years for the state, right?
I think that's absolutely right. We're going to have to make some decisions as a board in the next couple of months, but my guess is that we'll have some kind of a joint venture with the private sector. The state's not a developer, so we'll need somebody to do the development work. But we want to be involved long enough to ensure the state's vision is accomplished and establish development deals that allow us to capture the increase in value at the site. So rather than selling to the highest bidder now, we want to be able to capture that value curve and share in it on behalf of the citizens of the state.
Alan, forgive my maybe naivety in the topic, but what are the chances that the state kind of does a blend of both? So basically, you choose a partner for each, segment of development that is trying to be, to be accomplished.
Yeah, I think something like that is very much in the realm of the possible. And the board right now is actually wrestling with this question to find the right model. And RCLCO and Aaron Talkington, who's on this call, been doing a lot of research to help us think through what the best governing approach is. But it will likely be some kind of combination. I'm just suggesting that the principle is we want to be involved long enough to accomplish our vision. And I don't know, Aaron, do you want to weigh in on that at all?
Sure. I think the most important thing to add is that, it's easy to think about finding different development partners or building when you're thinking about a small site, right? Because somebody can come in and take out one building and, they already have the infrastructure and utilities and set up to be able to just go ahead and build that building. the biggest challenge for development with a 700-acre site is that we need to create those conditions. And so part of a development partnership up front is going to be about working with someone who can help us create the value for all of those players to come in and be successful, over the long term of developing the site. And as Alan described, there's many different ways that might be accomplished, whether it's one or multiple partners or a series of partnerships. There's a lot of examples and a lot of different hybrids there.
Alan, one of the challenges, and having experienced this as a mayor for 13 years, is investment capital, particularly development capital, is not patient. And when you talk about highest and best use of a piece of property, that is time related. That may be the highest and best use of the property at the moment, but that doesn't mean that is the highest and best use in the long term. But since the capital that invests in that is not patient, you get stuck doing that which is most expedient. The advantage that we have here that I think is critical is that the state has the ability to be patient. We can develop a long-term plan and stick to it, even though the pressures from current investment may say, well, this isn't the best use of the money. We should be doing something different. I think the state has the ability to basically set out a plan and then stick to it. Not to say that plan couldn't be modified. Anybody who's been involved in land planning knows you do your best to set up a plan and hope that it goes a certain way, but then circumstances change and that may have to be amended, and there should be a process for that amendment. But right now, to me, the key in the short term is to not allow the urge to just sell to the highest bidder to become the driving force behind this, because that, I think, will turn this into nothing more than just another standard development. It will not be anything special.
Yeah, let me jump in, Kelvin. I think you really nailed it. I think that is a really insightful comment from your experience. We do have the opportunity, the way to be patient with this and to do this in a long-term, thoughtful, deliberative way to maximize the value there for the citizens of the state of Utah, and to do the very best we can for that incredible growing area of the state. I've seen, and some of you have seen these demographic studies, these growth studies. I mean, the center of the population of the state is moving out of Salt Lake County into Utah County, which will do that. And guess what? Guess what's right there in the epicenter? The Point. So we have to be patient. We do have to be patient and not let those external pressures just sell the thing, get out of this thing. Not let those external pressures drive this, and really be patient to really do this. And so that's why it's so terrific to have these working groups to get the tremendous input from all of you.
To jump in just for a second on that point, as we work through the real estate analysis and the market analysis and, things that look like a highest and best use analysis for those of you who have done that work in the past, we're really trying to keep all of these points in mind, and make sure that, as we think through what is the highest and best use, that it's really not just the highest and best use for an investor today, because you're absolutely right that that's what you would get if you were to put up a for sale sign, which is probably a lot of for sale housing. And, there's a highest and best use to the state and to the community that, especially related to the education and the innovation acres here, that is very different from what might happen if you just said, please buy the site and carry the land. That is the biggest advantage that we have here, is that, you can find a partner who can really do the right thing according to your plan, because they aren't necessarily going to have to hold on to part of the site for 5 or 10 or 20 years while they wait for the opportunity to materialize. And so, you all probably have the opportunity to react to some of those pieces that we're working on over the next several months as we move towards the master planning. And, it's going to be a really important component to think about how we balance all of those different pieces.
Well, chairs, if we've answered the questions, and we certainly are open to further questions as we go, maybe we can move on to some of the additional questions and get some more feedback from this distinguished group.
I think that's great, Alan. Do you want to go ahead and lead us on that?
Sure. Well, the next question, kind of, what's your initial vision for the site? We've talked a little bit about the process that the public's gone through. We've talked at a very high level about some of the things the board's been thinking. We're looking for a site that can be forward-looking, be sustainable economically and environmentally and socially. But interested in you as informed members of the public, as people in the innovation world, in the education world. What's your initial vision for the site? It may change over time with more information, but we'd just like to get a sense now for thoughts you might have on what you'd like to see here, and specifically what elements would be helpful in making this site attractive to the research and innovation and education communities.
I think some of the things that you mentioned seem really interesting, like if it's got an integrated trail system, if it is unique in terms of what the site is like, I think that lends itself to a lot of interest and intrigue and differentiation. I think I mentioned this on a previous call, but I really think talking with biotech anchors would be a really good idea to kind of tailor it around some of the things that they might be looking for. But I think if it's got some unique elements like a trail system, unique environmental considerations that make it a little more unique versus most commercial real estate, and I think the interconnectedness of the region, of that community, could be a meaningful consideration as well.
Those are great thoughts. Yeah, I appreciate that. So something that differentiates the site, that makes it livable, appealing. Maybe things we think about are gathering place where you can go and have a nice restaurant. You can listen to somebody playing music on the street, concerts, etc. What else?
You need some kind of research anchor as well, if that's a company or a university or something that really drives having talent centralized in the area. That seems like it will be very important to economic development.
So, Alan, also, I think about anchors, and I'm gonna share my bias right up front for everyone. I worked in Internet of Things, robotics, and big data technologies for 3 years with UStar, and so working with Panasonic and Verizon and all of these companies on smart city technologies and launching a smart cities lab right now in Utah. I would love to see beyond a daybreak. I want to see a 10 years from now, 20 years from now, still innovative space. Something that, you talk about self-driving cars, and USU has a great program for things like that. I would like to see our research come alive in this area in some ways. We have great research in, and that'll probably come out of your environment. I would hope it will come out of your environment and air quality working group as well, but fantastic solar technologies, fantastic clean technologies, and UDOT is doing amazing things with research in smart city technologies and Internet of Things technologies. So my bias is I would like to visit this part of the state in 10 years and still feel like it's a little bit futuristic.
Donna, Diogo here, this might be me just, I don't know, again, you were all very kind to invite me to this group, but I feel a little bit out of place. I do teach at BYU. I think that might be why I may have been invited, voluntarily, by the way, but they wouldn't pay me to do it. But what I think, what Donna's saying, and I'll just take it one step further. I met a guy who works in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and his job is basically to provide sandboxes where certain laws don't apply, right? Like the CFPB is very much a stiff organization, and his job is to basically like check mark certain things and say, if you are within these parameters, we'll let you do ridiculous things. What are the chances? Because everything that has been talked about, I'm trying to think like, oh, let's have a convention center. No, that sounds stupid. Let's have an innovation lab. No, that the U has done a pretty decent job at that. BYU is still trying to get theirs together. Frankly, it's all bleh. I know Donna from her former life at UStar and visited her a few times, but it's really good, but it's a little bit bleh, so and I mean no criticism, by the way. I know everyone's like trying their hardest, but what if this is like a semi, this is going to sound horrible because of what's happening in Seattle, but like a semi-autonomous area where you legitimately have certain rules don't apply. Hey, Tesla, come test all your self-driving technology here. Legitimately, I would love to take my Tesla to a place where I can put it on the GPS and watch it take me there. Right now, that doesn't exist. Or what if it's like the incentive is if you fit a few parameters, and I don't know what those would be, but let's say you're a 100% self-sufficient building. You get, X economic incentive to be here, whether that's the concession of the land, whether that's, I don't know how those things work, honestly, you all do. But what if we go like a step closer to crazy?
If I could maybe build on what you're saying, Diogo, I love where you're going with that. And I think, in a past life as an entrepreneur trying to get a product to market, I think it leads me to think about speed and why does an innovation hit the market and another innovation doesn't. And it may have little to do with the quality of innovation, but frankly, the access to be able to accelerate that innovation. And without getting into a particular technology vertical, think about a country like Israel that has accelerated innovation as part of its state mandate, and it's sort of writ large. Can we create, and I'll just pick a term, innovation storefront, where you can, whether you're in Utah or anywhere else in the world, come to this place and access the combined resources that we possess across, whether it's one institution, many institutions, hospital systems, private industry, and test bed quickly. So when you talk about no rules, to me, especially living in my current environment of an academic setting, which tends to have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of slow to market. One of the things that is part of the job I do at the U is to try and break those barriers down, cut through that bureaucracy. Can we do that at scale so that we can be a destination that brings innovation forward at speed?
But Keith, that's what's so cool about this is it doesn't have to be at scale because it's a 700-acre project. It is big, but it's not too big. It's, what if roads were designed in a different way? What if public transportation took over the idea of roads? I spent some time in Europe and also growing up in a 4 million people city. There's just, you're not going to ride a car around. Frankly, I think Utahns are crazy. Why do we drive so much? By the way, I enjoy how much we drive in a sense, but there is a part of me that is like, this is ridiculous how many cars there are on the streets and how many cars people own. Like a couple owns like 4 cars. I guarantee one of you here lives with your significant other or spouse and you have 4 cars in the garage. You're smiling. I'm looking at you. So, you know, and it's pretty ridiculous. What if in that zone cars are banned? There are no cars. You know, what I'm saying is, if we really want to take research forward, it can't be originated from exogenous sources. We're not going to force research into a place. I love the idea of trails, but hey, look at my view. You know, I can drive 7 minutes up American Fork Canyon and be at all those awesome trails, and yet I don't. But a lot of people do. So they do have options. It's not that they would go here because there's integrated trails, although I think it's awesome. But how can we take this to a degree of crazy? And I'm probably going to get banned from this group. I'm talking too much.
Diogo, I just want to say, I think it's essential if we're going to do self-driving car tech and other innovative tech. Google is creating a city in the middle of nowhere from scratch so that they can create it in a way where their technologies can be tested. Panasonic is creating a city center outside of Denver. Like, these places are being created by industry because they can own them and create them outside of government rules, so that they can have private roads where they can test automated cars and things without all the rules about you have to have your foot on the accelerator and that's the law. So I think you're absolutely right. If we're going to build something, and I'm really serious about not being blah, if we're going to build something that's awesome, in 10 years, we have to think about what innovations that aren't going to take off for 10 or 15 or 25 years for it to still be that cool. And I absolutely agree that we should bend the rules in this space in a way that keeps people safe and innovative and fun. But it's kind of a Disneyland in that the rules of life don't apply necessarily when you're in here, and you can do amazing things, like Keith said, that you can't do in other places in the world. That's why industry is building and investing in these areas, because the red tape has been cut through for them.
And that's an endogenous thing, Donna. Like, that's one of those things that I feel like this group, or I don't know, maybe this group can't do, but I feel like it's one of the things that we can do, instead of like talking about, you know, the all the cool things that we can try to, you know, if we just do this, innovation will come. If there was a recipe for innovation, you know, it would have been done all over. And there's just not a recipe for innovation other than deregulation and letting things brew what they brew. We have such a vibrant university presence in Utah. And then you look around and there's such an amazing entrepreneurial scene that if we just let those things faster, they will grow. They will develop on their own. The things that we don't see in Utah are things that are, you know, regulated. Frankly, for our $75 million fund, we're not going to invest in anything that is overly regulated because we don't have the resources to go, you know, uphold it for many years. So I promise I will turn off my mic.
This is great.
At the risk of sounding like the old man in the group, I love the ideas of crazy. I love the ideas of sponsoring and fostering as much innovation as we can in unique and different ways. I would say, though, Diogo, there are some models that have worked and that have tried and true principles in attracting innovation. And that has to do with creating critical mass, creating talent pools that people will come to because they know that those exist. So part of my vision in seeing what might happen here is trying to create that vision of interdisciplinary connections, to have the biotech field alongside the high tech, along with the educational higher ed. And, you know, what would be so crazy about having a research hospital in the middle of this that could accommodate clinical trials that are so required by FDA, but done in a way that is unique to anywhere else, and allow us to do that in a way that would expedite the delivery of important drugs and devices and things of that nature. I would love to see a focus on research and development innovation. I don't envision seeing large manufacturing on this site, because I think that, you know, 700 acres sounds like a lot, But Randy Rasmussen could tell you that they just built a new manufacturing facility for BioFire. It took up 40 acres. I mean, that a big manufacturing facility would not be something I think would fit well in this, but a good anchor R&D type operation or smaller scale type manufacturing, things of that nature. But the idea being that you create the interdisciplinary opportunities so that you can blend the different technologies together in a way that maybe has never been done.
Yeah, and I would say I would agree about not putting a lot of manufacturing in. I think Diego's idea of a sandbox, the idea of an R&D, our own little eureka.
Happy to connect anyone to the guy at the CFPB. I thought he has like some really good insights into what's needed, and he's working on a national level, so which tends to be more confusing.
Kelvin, to your point, when I was in Philadelphia, I ran a project for the city that brought a number of big research universities and hospitals together with private industry and venture capital. And one of the things they wanted to try and figure out was how to accelerate innovation. And one of the big aha moments early on in the project for the big health systems was that they were shocked to learn it takes 18 months to go through a cycle for an external company to get an initial agreement to do business with them. And that's for, say, a test of a clinical product or whatever it is, right? And the convergence piece that you're talking about multiple disciplines, along with an environment in which you can test them, because what you're talking about are new vertical markets, new technologies that are going to be in highly regulated environments with FDA in particular required to weigh in. And Will can probably speak more specifically from his own experience. Commercially, these are companies that innovate iteratively in a lot of different environments, and those processes are regulated. And if memory serves, I think every day a therapeutic doesn't hit the market and they lose a day of patent life, it's somewhere in the millions of dollars. And so the notion of being able to create an environment inclusive of perhaps a hospital where you can do that level of test bedding at speed, I think could be incredibly unique and incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I'll speak to actually each of the previous points here. The key themes I'd like to bring forth are interdisciplinary, number one. The second is kind of our entire broader notion of things that impact health. And Donna's comments about, clean environments, clean buildings, et cetera, I think really ring true for me as we think about that from a health care perspective. The third thing is about Utah as a state and its attractiveness as a state in a world where the coasts, or specifically in the world that I live in, which is the biotech world, very, very crowded in California and Boston. And I think that's an important part to consider. And I think a fourth thing to consider is actually potential co-locations and synergies, and particularly with Silicon Slopes as a neighbor, and the possibilities for Utah as a state to excel. And I'll kind of go reverse ways, I think. First of all, if you look at major big tech companies, you look at a Google and you look at an Apple and you look at an IBM, what kind of things what things are they focused on? There is a segment of their business that they are focusing toward healthcare. And healthcare is what 18% of our gross domestic product. And I have an obvious bias, but I do think that there is, at least it's worthy to deeply consider the potential impact that an interdisciplinary approach in a location like this can have on innovation in healthcare. And I'm not speaking just to biotech, but innovation in healthcare with respect to digital and mobile health, right? In a world of big data now, and particularly in a world where we as various universities, whether it's BYU, whether it's UVU, Utah State, University of Utah, have capabilities in the computer sciences, engineering, and big data space. It seems attractive to me, at least on the face of it, to think about the possibilities that we have with respect to big data, not just with electronic health records, but with environmental sensors and the like, to really do great things in terms of being an innovation hub and looking at different ways in which we can enhance both the longevity and the quality of our population's health. So I think that is something I think to deeply consider. I think that's an area we can excel. And I think that's an area where we can attract, in the right setting, people who tend to congregate on the coast, because there's a lot of that kind of stuff in Seattle and the San Francisco area and in the Boston, Cambridge area. So that's kind of one area. The second thing is, I don't think I would throw away manufacturing per se in terms of big manufacturing sites. I think there's tons of innovation that can be made in the manufacturing space with, again, smaller innovative units, as we look to see how we improve, how we enhance both the quality and the speed of manufacturing processes. So I don't personally look at manufacturing as kind of having a big factory. I'm looking at manufacturing more in terms of how can you do it better, faster, potentially cheaper, in a variety of arenas, ranging from devices, diagnostic kits to different innovations, or different therapies, vaccines, and the like. So I think that's an important consideration. And I think that's an area, again, where I think we can attract and excel. The third thing that I won't want to throw away is where I touched on this interdisciplinary. I, as a physician, think about what types of things on the endocrine consulters and endocrinologists should I be doing for patient A, B, and C. That kind of stuff impacts about 10% of morbidity and mortality as a population. 90% of morbidity and mortality is impacted by the environment, by socio-behavioral aspects of health, by personal habits, by genetics, and the like. And it's some of those other areas that we don't pay sufficient attention to that I think we can really look in an interdisciplinary way in terms of how we can enhance health. So I don't exactly know, because I haven't thought enough about this particular 700 acre space, but I think some of those things that I just said are certainly worthy of consideration.
Outstanding. Yeah. Any other thoughts along these lines? The next question that we had to drive discussion a little bit, we've already touched on, but maybe I'll raise it again to see if we can exhaust the topic a little more. That is, what's the role of higher education at this site? And maybe related to that, are there other partners that we ought to be looking at to recruit or help us think through this effort?
I'm going to jump in on higher ed because that's why I'm here. I heard you, Commissioner Wolstenholme, earlier as you were talking about, right, finding the industry and the higher ed partner that works with it. Or I think higher ed plays a strong role in this, and I think the more collaborative and cooperative we can be, as Will was saying, that interdisciplinary, we all have different strengths in our institutions, and we all have different challenges in our institutions. And I think one of the great opportunities we have with this blank canvas is to really build partnerships and cooperative strategies that raise the bar for everyone. It's always harder to do that. It will be a challenge to get higher education institutions to work together, and we are kind of bureaucratic, but man, it's a great opportunity. So if higher ed could come together with really great innovations from entrepreneurship to research and biomed and health medicine and cybersecurity and you know, even aeronautics and space dynamics and other great ideas that come across the state, if we could take our strengths and contribute, it would be awesome. So I would love to see a cooperative higher ed engagement in this space.
Well, I'll second what Donna said. I think she's absolutely right on. And I concur. It just was coincidental from about 5 this morning until 7. I was reviewing my medical knowledge self-assessment program, with my point not being what is the newest in rheumatology, but the principle being continuing education is critical in a rapidly changing world. As a board member, I'm learning stuff about cybersecurity that I would never have even thought of otherwise, but that goes on forever. Physician, continuing education and the like. What would be unique is that if we can do this on behalf of the state of Utah in a multi or institutional manner to provide those settings. Now, one could argue, if you're a professor at the University of Utah, that we could just do all this stuff online. I think there are limitations to purely online learning, because there's a lot of times you would want multiple class discussions and the like, or kind of interinstitutional Zoom discussions to talk about problem A, B, or C, because I love the entire notion of making this very, I'll call it translational, but making it very, very public-private partnership oriented, so that the industry problems that we face, with my industry hat on, we can deal with academicians who have deep insight into topics A, B, C, or D. I don't exactly know how you would do it, but I really love the notion. And again, I think that that could help knit the state together, bring our various institutions together, but actually, most importantly, probably have a better product for the individuals who are working on this site and elsewhere.
Donna, from my perspective, I just wanted to understand, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think this is a great opportunity to bring the institutions together. Maybe have one of the lead institutions take the lead on a specific topic that they're been researching or connected with, but then bringing the others in. It would be really nice to make sure that we're including everyone in the discussion where it's important and where there's a good fit, right? And where that institution can really play into the innovation and driving the economy and helping with a lot of these things that we've just discussed.
And I would add.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa, go on.
I would just add, I mean, I love Diego's comments about thinking into the future and the wonder of technology of the future. And as an academic, I think about engagement of young people and engaging them in the activities that are going on, such that we create a hub in Utah that excites students about technology and advancing, to bring more of a tech hub into the entire state via our population.
I have 2 thoughts to share building on that. Lisa, I love that idea of a hub that incites engagement and leads a flow into technology or promotes STEM. I wonder if we can reach deeper down to younger ages and not consider this just from a higher education perspective, but one that creates a pipeline and a channel to draw students in from an early age and cultivates programs and opportunities alongside industry to expose folks to a wider diversity of opportunity before they enter into higher education. The second point I'd raise is it's a bit of a it's the inverse, making the same point, Donna, that you articulated, with which I agree very much. We should use caution not to king make or queen make with this space. There will be a risk because there is often not a tremendous amount of interinstitutional collaboration that happens other than at the professorial or research level, that a single school becomes dominant in positioning for this space, which has this unique opportunity to be very neutral as a bit of a Swiss ground to bring many folks together. And so setting that as a guiding principle or a swim lane not to be violated, to me seems rather important, and also a tremendously unique opportunity to drive a level of collaboration that hasn't existed in Utah heretofore.
Seems smart, and also a little bit toward the crazy side, which I like that conversation from earlier. It's an academic bureaucracy-free zone, basically, right? You can be a part of it, but you have to make certain sacrifices to be part of the innovative collaboration that's happening at the space.
Yeah, I want to echo all the comments about the importance of collaboration on an interinstitutional level. And Chris, maybe also balancing out your comment about reaching real early in terms of that educational opportunity. I think we also have sort of the equal and opposite opportunity for lifelong learning and training workforce, and doing it in close proximity to industry, where we can be sort of ahead of the curve a little bit and understanding the needs and be developing rapidly and pivoting where necessary some of the programs, be they degree-based or otherwise.
Keith, I love that point. I'm so glad that you raised that. I have 4 children, as of tomorrow, 6 and under. One of their favorite activities is facilitated by the public library system in Salt Lake County, which has them go to do crafts and reading time at senior centers. And it's an extraordinary opportunity for them to commingle on all dimensions and to create in a very generative and safe space. I think that's a marvelous idea.
I think as Will was talking about interdisciplinary and we're talking about collaborative, the key here is then the lifelong cycle of innovation and technology, right? Drawing in, and each of our institutions touches a lifelong cycle of education. So as we're talking about what the role of higher ed is, and again, another bias because I run community education and I also run executive education, and those departments work really hard on that whole life cycle. We train from 6 to, grave. So there's a lot of different points and a lot of great things that can happen there. I do think there's an opportunity to create a neutral review board of some sort with representation from each institution. There's some opportunities here to almost create a framework for collaboration that calls upon the institutions to kind of set their bureaucracy aside or self-interest aside for the opportunity to work with industry and other things. I think about reviewing grants and other things that we had, if we had multiple institutions working to vet projects or other things, and then bringing their piece of it to help move the innovation forward. For one, it might be entrepreneurship. For another, it might be, we have this great research that we can contribute, or we have this great professor we can contribute. And, so you need the representation there, but it does need to be collaborative, open-minded, with a little bit of that framework set in place. And I think that's a challenge we could tackle.
What are the chances the proceeds of something like this, whether it's a partial sale of the land or whatever it might be, is used to foster innovation through, literally pumping money into a university, or I don't know what's legal in this kind of stuff. So what are the avenues?
That's a really good thought. One of the things that we're working on a private donor now, with it be an extension, really probably for the University of Utah, and a research park that'll just be on the other end of town from where this is at, on the other end of Salt Lake City. But the donor of that main purpose is to whatever revenue is generated at this research park will go back 100% into scholarships. So his initiative is to drive scholarships for students across the entire 16 institutions of the state of Utah to make sure students have opportunities to do that. So just reverse that, and whatever revenue is created, or from the sale of land or from innovation or whatever, can a certain part of that go back into innovation, right? To be able to keep that going, because if it goes back to the institutions, what are we going to do? Then we're going to go right back to legislature, right? So we've got to be able to create a funding model that's going to drive that innovation if we want it to be long-term, of creating it self-funding moving forward. So I think that's a point well taken. We got to figure that out, how to generate revenues to continue the innovation. If not, it's going to die out at some point.
I have a follow-up question to that, which is, is there opportunity? I don't know if this is a question for Dave or Alan or someone else, and maybe there's not an answer to it, but is the state considering all forms of monetization in terms of, the obvious is we're going to sell the land to different developers who will develop it and then lease out buildings, but is there a scenario where the state retains ownership of the land and enters into very, very long lease periods? I like to think in analogs. One of the analogs I think about is Stanford University, obviously the largest kind of landmass, I think, of any university in the country. And one of the original requirements when Leland Stanford donated the land to the university to found it was that the land could not be sold. And so the university has entered into interesting arrangements with long-term lease cycles, which has allowed it to maintain the integrity of the entire parcel, maintain some control, and also ongoing revenue. And I'm not privy, obviously, or knowledgeable sufficient to understand the details, but are those types of engagements being considered?
Yeah, Chris, let me pick up on that. I mean, I think everything is on the table.
Right.
If we can be creative with something, the Stanford model, for example, that you just suggested, and other models that our consultants are looking at, I mean, everything is on the table. As I said earlier, I mean, there are some voices that will say, why are we doing this? Just sell it off for how many millions you can get and put it into the state coffers. But more voices are committed to following the process that we're doing right now. And what great thinking that you're bringing to this.
But that's pretty clear, because the answer to me is incredibly clear. If the state simply sells it off, then we'll end up with 700 acres of 5-story office towers,
right,
littered like everywhere else across the state, which isn't to criticize, but it is to say that it will simply be more of the same.
That's not what
we're unique.
Oh, right.
So as a counterpoint to that, if the state keeps it but doesn't create some kind of perpetuation, then you end up with a political pawn. You end up with 700 acres that somebody does change their mind and decides to sell it, in the future. So I think walking that line of what's the perpetuation of this trust and innovation that we're creating, or this ability to innovate, that it's written in a way or created as a cooperative in a way that has a perpetuation and a succession plan. Because I think if you do leave it up to legislators, it's going to just become a political fight.
And Donna, you just used an interesting word, where the trust, which is, and I'll use it in a different frame, but right now where there's political will, why not actually donate the land into a trust for the public goods that cannot be sold and that has restrictions that have been placed on it, such that it can become a public good in perpetuity, and truly promote this notion of public-private innovation ongoing with a sustainable model from ongoing lease and rents.
I think that's a really cool idea, actually.
But just
the only problem is the misalignments that could occur, from all the, people that won't want to develop on a public land that they know they can't own.
I agree, but my counterpoint to that, Diogo, is Sand Hill Road is literally some of the most valuable real estate
100%
all of the country, and the land is owned by the university, among others. It certainly hasn't stopped the single most innovative, tech hub in the world. So it can be done. I look at Texas Medical Center as another analog, and I don't understand their model, but my gosh, what a marvelous! They're much larger, right? And these like 3,000 acres, just short of 5 square miles. But I don't know if folks visited that, but I remember the first time I went to TMC in Houston, and my mind was just blown by this extraordinary level of innovation, world-class medicine. You see the same thing in Boston with all of these universities commingled alongside industry in a way that just creates this its own gravitational force, where everybody wants to be a part of that, and that is the epicenter of creation with those disciplines. We have that same opportunity here. So one suggestion I have for this group is, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I wonder if there's a way that we can have a facilitated generative discussion as a follow-on to this, where we can look at some industry analogs. We can look at analogs around the world where projects like this have been undertaken, and maybe some which have been successful and some which have not, and then use that to have a truly free whiteboarding session where no ideas are stupid, all ideas are welcome, the crazier the better, and then begin to start to cluster those in a way, just typical design thinking, D-school design thinking, that would allow us to start to map that. And obviously you'd really want to have your public involvement here, but at least begin to come up with a framework for how to think about this topic, because otherwise we have the possibility of wandering into interesting but aimless paths, but without enough structure to make this particularly actionable over time.
Chris, this is Dave. I think that's a really good idea. I've been here making some notes, trying to figure out how do we bring all this together to try to make some sense of even trying to break some breakout groups, or to figure out maybe next steps for our next meeting, Steve, of how we bring all this together. Alan, what would be the possibility of bringing in somebody to lead that type of discussion and maybe get together social distance somewhere and to really put a lot of that stuff on the whiteboard and map out some different directions that we could take back to the full board of opportunities to maybe really look at?
It is a great suggestion. I think that's something that we certainly could do. And if you've got ideas on something that would be good in that role, send me a text or email. Let's think about it. That's what's been going through my mind. Lots of great thinking here. We clearly have the right people involved. How do we make sure that we focus to a point where we get some direction and can make it actionable? So,
Alan, I have ideas for several third-party facilitators, with no bias. Glad to connect for you to explore.
That'd be great. Thanks.
I think the key to that too is the homework that you talked about, Chris, right? Really looking at the models and not just the result of the model, but where did it start from, and what's the finance and what's the legislation, like who's the partner, and whether it's international or other great innovations, how did it really get started and who championed it? And then how did they figure out the structure and how did they pay for it? So it's one thing to look at research triangle and say, that's fantastic, but what were the elements that made it successful is a little deeper dig. And I think some homework that we need to do on different models.
Well, and I will say,
maybe speaking out of turn, we've done a little bit of that we could share with this group.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron. Talk about what you're doing now.
Donna and team, I think, you guys are all headed in a really interesting direction. And I think all of you collectively have far more knowledge on the intricacies of how to make the academic and the institutional side of this bring these ideas to life than I do. I certainly come from the real estate and the district level perspective of thinking about how these different pieces might actually come together and really make something really special from a place perspective. We have done some deep dives on different innovation districts and kind of taken a broad look at, what are some of the different models that are out there that people have used and, how they've started to work. And I'd be happy to share some of those ideas and, as much or, as little of some of our thinking as is helpful for you all without, limiting this group to thinking about, well, where are you thinking about, which it would be the worst outcome as you go into kind of the design thinking exercise. But, maybe Alan and I can regroup on, what pieces would be helpful for this group to see and to influence your thinking, and we can see where we go from there.
Alan, could you send those out to us before the next meeting so everybody on the committee will have an opportunity to read through those, and then maybe if other people have other ideas, let's shoot those to Aaron or to Alan and see if they can dig up the homework on that. And I'm happy to help as well, Alan, if you get some of those. Even have some people here in the office to help pull the information together on that, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, we'd be happy to. And, as Aaron said, we've looked at similar models around the country, about the same size, the kind of organizational structure, maybe have some government involvement, what's working, what's not, what lessons can we learn from each of them. And so it's still somewhat early in the process, but we are trying to shepherd our board along to look at the homework that's been done to this point and start make some decisions on governance structure. What is the role of the state long term? How do we balance being able to control the outcome at this site with the appropriate role of a state entity? And I think we're making some progress, but what you've talked about today is really helpful and can help us refine that.
I think some of the ideas are really helpful. Are we restricting to domestic research? Are we interested in looking at Israel or London or some of the other innovation circles that are happening internationally? I know it may not be quite as relevant, but it could also be a little outside the box and help us bring something that's a better standard than what we're seeing. Different standard, not better, different. Word I want there.
Yeah, no question. We've started with a broad view and looked at some things internationally, and there are some really intriguing models. I think most of the work that RCLCO is doing right now has been domestic, but we don't want to unduly constrain our creativity.
Yeah, if others on this call have examples of international or just other ways that innovation has been accomplished that you'd want to share with this group, I think that could be a really valuable addition to the work that we'll send around.
And I think we've kind of jumped ahead to the last point, which is next steps. What additional information do you need? How can we best communicate with you? We did have a question on ensuring that this site is a complement to and not a competitor to other projects that are going on. We've heard some discussion about the research park at the University of Utah. Salt Lake City has a biotech initiative, Silicon Slopes, et cetera. It's not our goal to jump in and compete. I think we want to collaborate and, as we said, create critical mass for the region that will spur an interest from anchors that will want to live here, or we want to locate here, and advance the interests of the state rather than trying to advance the interests of this site in competition with others. So
Alan, if we can accomplish some of what we're talking about, where it's really innovative and different, I don't think we'd have to worry as much about competing, because it would be a unique offering that's not being done in other spots. That's one of the advantages of this concept, I think.
I think that's consistent with our thinking, and it's a great point, Jeff. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the characteristics of each of those things that you articulated, Alan, are in and of themselves unique and will appeal to different customer bases, if you will. So I don't think there needs to be any feeling that there's competition going on here. This is all of this is a reflection of the innovative spirit that exists in the state and the interest that has already been expressed from outside the state to tap into that. And so I think the more options we provide for companies and individuals to engage with that innovation ecosystem statewide, the better off every one of these projects is going to be. So I think they become synergistic, not competitive at all.
That's the hope, and I agree. Yep. Anything else you want to share? Anything that we could provide to you that would be useful at this stage? All right. Well, listen, this is not your last opportunity. You've got the contact information. In fact, I'm going to put up some contact information that you may want to jot down, and you can get in touch with us at any time. Let me see if I can find it. But just know that I'm so grateful that you would spend this kind of effort and time with us. you've got experience far beyond mine, and we are just tickled that you'd share your expertise. That's the information for our general contact with our communications group. I think I've sent out my contact information. It's just Alan Matheson at utah.gov. And my phone number, 801-554-5496. And I would absolutely welcome any contact from you. So I'll turn it over to our chairs.
Just to say thank you to all of you. That was incredibly stimulating. What, like I said when we started this, I didn't know any of you, and wow, we are going to have so much fun working together on this. And I go back to answering Chris's comment. I mean, anything's on the table. I mean, anything and everything is on the table. So let's really, really bring our A game to this committee. So thanks to all of you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'll just follow up with that, and then we can sign off for the day. I'm sure everybody's got another meeting to jump onto. That's our life that we live now, right? But thank you for the top thoughts and efforts. And Steve's right. We got one chance to get it right. I prefer we take our time and we think through what's going to be the best long term and what can start to generate some revenue for the state of Utah. Both economically as well as innovatively, or revenues that we create that we can put back into innovation to move forward. So thanks everybody, appreciate it. Alan, anything else before we sign off, or does anybody have anything else before we sign off?
No, I think that's great.